Snow drifted like pale ash over Hawthorne Estate, softening every hedge, gable, and lantern glow into a quiet painting of winter splendor. Guests spilled from carriages at the front entrance, their laughter tumbling into the crisp air as footmen hurried to relieve them of cloaks trimmed in sable and fox. Inside, a ballad swelled beneath the chandeliers, violins warming the gilded hall with the promise of a Christmas season arranged to perfection. Yet beyond the glow, past the manicured gravel and the feathered plumes of the horses, the world grew still, too still for a night of celebration, and it was there the Duke walked, seeking a moment untouched by obligation. Alexander Hawthorne, admired, whispered about, and hopelessly sought after by mothers and daughters alike, carried his solitude with a practiced grace. He moved through the cold as if it were a cloak of its own, one he preferred to the velvet-lined prisons of drawing-rooms. The night breathed mist against his breath, and somewhere behind him, a cluster of young ladies speculated why such a man often removed himself from the warmth of company. None imagined he walked simply to feel something real. A faint rustle carried from the servants' outbuildings near the stables, a small sound, like fabric brushing stone. He paused. The horses shifted in their stalls, stamping frost from the floor, but the sound did not belong to them. He stepped closer, boots whispering over snow. A lantern hung on a hook by the stable door, its flame low, and in its tremor he saw the outline of someone crouched by the warming vent. For an instant he wondered if it was a stable boy sheltering from punishment, or perhaps one of the maids hiding tears after a reprimand. But as he approached, the figure shrank away, arms tightening around folded knees. "Who is there?" he asked, the austerity of his voice softened only by concern. The figure lifted her head, and the lantern glow revealed a young woman. Her face pale with cold, her hair unpinned and swept by the wind, her cloak so thin it belonged to someone who had not expected to walk far. Her eyes, wide and dark, carried a fear that struck him harder than the winter air. "Forgive me, your grace," she whispered, as though she already expected judgment. "I did not mean to trespass." He knew her face, though he could not place it at once. She was gently bred. No maid moved with that level of quiet self-command. But the trembling in her mouth, the careful hold of her own arms around her body, those belonged to someone who had not been treated gently in some time. "You are cold," he said, more softly than he intended. "Stand. You will freeze out here." She hesitated as though rising might expose some deeper shame. When she finally stood, he saw the hem of her gown was soaked and muddied, its stitching unraveled, as though she had walked many miles in garments not meant for hardship. There was a fine bruise along her jaw, half hidden by a lock of hair. His jaw tightened. "I will not harm you," he added, gentler still. Her gaze flickered to the lights glowing from the mansion windows. Music drifted out in fragments, laughter, a chord from a violin, the scent of roasted chestnuts carried by the wind. She pressed her lips together as though the sound pained her. "I am Charlotte Finch," she whispered. The name struck him like a bell in a quiet chapel. Finch. A family once well regarded, though recently the subject of unwelcome gossip in London. Something about a young woman dismissed suddenly from her guardian's household. Rumors unproven, yet vicious enough to cling. He bowed his head slightly, acknowledging her identity without pressing the subject. "Miss Finch, what are you doing out here alone?" She breathed, and the breath came out uneven. "Trying not to be seen." Her answer held layers he instantly recognized. Shame, fear, pride fighting to survive beneath both. His gaze swept the dark beyond her, imagining her wandering the countryside with nowhere safe to rest. It was unthinkable that a woman of her upbringing would end up near the stables of his estate unless circumstances were dire. "Have you eaten?" he asked. She shook her head. He slipped off a glove and extended his hand. "Come inside. The servants' hall is warm." Her eyes widened, not in gratitude but in alarm. "No, if your guests see me, if anyone recognizes me." She stepped back, drawing her cloak tighter, fragile as wet parchment. "They will think you, the estate, any association with me is dangerous. I should not even have spoken my name." The sting in her voice was not melodrama but truth shaped by humiliation. He could almost hear her recent past echoing between her words. Turned out from her relative's home, stripped of protection, a single rumor enough to make society fold its hands and declare itself blameless. "Miss Finch," he said quietly. "I do not intend to leave you standing in the snow." Her chin trembled. "I am not asking for anything, Your Grace. Only that you pretend you did not find me." "That," he replied, "is the one thing I cannot do." Wind surged across the courtyard, lifting her hair like a dark ribbon. For the briefest moment her face, though weary, held the delicate beauty of someone who had once been secure in her world. Now she stood like an abandoned willow, bending in storms meant for stronger trees. He took a step closer. She did not retreat this time, but she did not meet his eyes either. When he offered his hand again, she stared at it as though it were some impossible mercy. "Why are you being kind to me?" she whispered. "Kindness," he answered, "is not a rare commodity. It is simply seldom given at the right moment." Her breath caught, and for a heartbeat her expression cracked open into something vulnerable, frightened, and deeply human. The lantern flame flickered, casting a soft glow over her face. Snowflakes clung to her lashes like tiny crystals. But before she could speak, a distant burst of laughter echoed from the manor. High, careless, belonging to people who had never feared being cast out. Charlotte flinched visibly, and her hand rose involuntarily toward him, as though seeking balance she did not dare request. "Your Grace," she murmured, her voice breaking in the cold. "Please, do not send me away." And the wind carried her next words with trembling clarity, a whisper that tightened something deep inside him. "My reputation is gone, my family has abandoned me, and I have nowhere left to go." The kitchen's fire cast a generous amber glow, warming the stone floor and making the copper pans gleam like trophies reclaimed from winter's grasp. Alexander guided Charlotte inside through the servants' passage. His expression composed, though his pulse carried a quiet urgency he rarely felt for anyone outside his bloodline. The maids, startled to see a noblewoman in such disarray, looked between one another before lowering their gazes. In a house governed by strict hierarchy, the Duke's presence meant their questions must remain unasked. "Sit," he said softly, gesturing toward the long bench near the hearth. Charlotte hesitated only a moment, then lowered herself with a fragility that made the Duke's throat tighten. Her fingers remained clenched within her sleeves, as though she believed warmth must be earned rather than received freely. The scullery maid set a cup of warm milk on the table, and Alexander added a small roll beside it, its crust lightly cracked, steam escaping in threads. "You should eat," he murmured. Her eyes dropped. "I am not accustomed to being served by your staff, Your Grace." "Then let it be a temporary courtesy," he answered, folding his gloves and placing them on the table. "Eat because it is cold. Eat because you are cold." She touched the crust with tentative fingertips, then broke a piece and brought it to her lips. The smallest tremor passed through her, as though the taste of something warm reminded her of a life she no longer possessed. She glanced away, but not before he saw her swallow hard, fighting tears she refused to shed. While she ate, Alexander observed her with the restrained attentiveness of a man trained to notice details yet forbidden to comment. Her gown bore the color of faded lavender, a hue once fashionable but now dull from wear. The stitching along her hem told a story of hurried repairs, done by a hand untrained for servile tasks. Her boots were thin, meant for promenades rather than long, desperate walks in winter. Everything about her whispered of a life dismantled piece by piece. Outside the kitchen door, footsteps halted. A pair of footmen exchanged murmured words, their eyes flicking toward Charlotte before darting away. Whispers traveled in the servants' hall swiftly, like sails catching wind. A young woman of fragile breeding appearing beside their master was too provocative a mystery not to stir unease. "Your Grace," Charlotte said quietly, sensing the shift in atmosphere. "If I cause trouble, I should leave before." "You will not leave," he replied, his voice firm but not harsh. "Not until I understand what has been done to you." Her breath faltered. "My presence here may be misconstrued." He stiffened at her choice of word. Misconstrued was the language of scandal, the vocabulary of ballrooms hungry for whispers. Already he imagined the murmurs. The Duke shelters a fallen woman. The Duke entertains a companion during Christmas. The Duke offers charity of a questionable sort. Before he could reassure her, the kitchen door swung open and Mrs. Langford, the housekeeper, froze mid-step. She took in Charlotte's torn cloak, her trembling hands, and the Duke's nearness. Her eyes widened with the subtle alarm of someone who had served the aristocracy long enough to understand how fragile reputation was, especially when its fractures began in the servants' wing. "Your Grace," she said carefully, lowering into a curtsy. "Shall I prepare a guest chamber?" Charlotte startled. "No, please no. I cannot take a guest room. I am not." Alexander stepped forward. "A small chamber. Something discreet." Mrs. Langford nodded, though worry shadowed her face. "At once, Your Grace." Charlotte stood abruptly. "I cannot allow this. If someone discovers I am here, uninvited, unattended, they will blame you. They will say I manipulated your charity. They will say I sought favor." Her voice quivered, but the words were precise, each one carved from painful experience. The Duke understood then that she had already endured accusations sharp enough to mark her spirit. "Let them say what they will," he said. "I am not beholden to gossip." "You may not be," she whispered, "but your household is, your lineage is, your future Duchess is." Her eyes met his, wide with the sincerity of someone who wanted nothing and feared everything. "Please do not endanger yourself for my sake." He reached for her glove, gently turning her hand to reveal the rawness where cold had bitten her skin. "This is not about danger," he said. "It is about decency." Before she could respond, the distant hum of aristocratic chatter approached. Two elegantly dressed ladies entered the servants' corridor by chance, or misfortune. Their eyes landed instantly on Charlotte, her bedraggled form unmistakably out of place. "Oh," one lady breathed, her lips curving in a smile lacking warmth. "Your Grace, how unexpected to find you in such company." The second lady's gaze swept Charlotte's ruined gown, lingering on its frayed hem with wicked satisfaction. "I did not realize the estate had extended its charity to unannounced visitors." Charlotte stiffened, humiliation washing over her in a visible wave. Alexander stepped forward, placing himself between Charlotte and the scrutiny. "Miss Finch is under my protection. I expect the same respect shown to any guest of this house." The women exchanged glances, sharp, incredulous, delighted in the scandal they had found. "Of course, Your Grace," one murmured, voice dripping false sweetness. "We shall enjoy relaying your generosity to the others." They swept away, the rustle of their silk leaving a sting in the air. Charlotte's shoulders sagged. "You see," she whispered, "even your kindness becomes a weapon in their hands." He exhaled slowly, anger simmering beneath his steady composure. "Their opinions are irrelevant." "But their tongues are not," she said with quiet despair. "Society listens to them. It never listens to women like me." Mrs. Langford returned, clasping her hands nervously. "The chamber is ready, Your Grace." Charlotte rose, her expression determined. "I should go before more eyes see me. Miss Finch." "Your Grace, please." Her voice was soft but steely, as though she had found one remaining shard of dignity and meant to hold it tightly. "If I stay, they will tear you apart with whispers. I cannot be the cause of your ruin." He stepped toward her. So did she, though only to keep her balance. And as they stood in that narrow corridor, the warmth of the kitchen behind them and the cold of society pressing in from every door, Charlotte looked up at him with a trembling breath and said the words that pierced through the quiet like a violin string pulled too tight. "Before this night is over, everyone in your world will know I am here." Night settled over the estate like a velvet shroud, muffling the distant chatter of guests and dimming the last golden light that spilled from the grand windows. The snow had deepened, turning every sound outside the manor into a soft, swallowed echo. Charlotte stood near the servants' door, her borrowed cloak gathered tightly around her shoulders, her breath rising in fragile wisps. She had slipped away from the warmth of the kitchen the moment Alexander turned to speak with Mrs. Langford. It was not ingratitude that drove her, but a desperation carved so deeply into her spirit that staying felt more dangerous than the cold. She lingered beneath the narrow overhang of the stable office, staring at the faint glow of lanterns arranged like scattered stars across the courtyard. Her thoughts throbbed with a cruel certainty she had lived with for weeks. Everywhere she went, doors closed, Every kindness she touched became fuel for whispers. She could not, would not, allow her presence to become a stain upon the one household that had shown her a shred of mercy. Yet as the cold gnawed at her fingers and seeped through her shoes, she felt her resolve tremble. Pride was a luxury she could not afford, and the night was colder than anything she had thought to endure. She pressed her forehead against the wooden doorframe, fighting the urge to cry. Tears, she knew, solved nothing. They only reminded her of what she had lost. The snow behind her shifted. She turned just as Alexander emerged from the shadows, cloak unfastened, hair dampened by frost. He looked as though he had been searching with growing urgency, and the tension in his shoulders eased only slightly when he found her. "I knew you would come here," he said, stepping closer. "You ran the moment I turned away." "I did not run," she replied, though her voice wavered. "I removed myself before my presence caused further harm." "Harm?" he echoed softly. "Is that what you believe you bring?" She lowered her gaze. "It is what I have been told." Repeatedly. A gust of wind cut between them, making her shiver so visibly that he swore under his breath and unfastened his cloak, placing it around her shoulders with a gentleness that startled her. It was warm, lined with thick wool, carrying the faint scent of cedar and winter air. She clutched it automatically, overwhelmed by the sensation of being protected. "You cannot stay out here," he murmured. "You will freeze." "I cannot stay inside either," she whispered. "Not when your guests are already speculating. They saw the state I was in. They will form their own conclusions, some worse than the truth." His jaw tightened. "I do not care what they think." "But I do," she said, meeting his gaze with a fragile steadiness. "Not for my sake. My reputation is already in tatters, but for yours. Your name is unblemished. Your estate is admired. You are spoken of as though you were some immovable pillar of propriety. I will not be the reason that changes." A shadow flickered through his expression, something like pain, but restrained, controlled, shaped by years of duty. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so the storm could not steal his words. "I do not care for their approval, Miss Finch. I care for justice, and what was done to you was unjust." Her breath caught, and for a moment she allowed herself to stand still beneath his gaze. But the fear returned quickly, curling around her ribs. "You do not know what was said," she murmured. "You do not know why they sent me away." "Then tell me," he said. She turned toward the stable wall, tracing the grain of the wood with trembling fingers. "My guardian wished me to marry a man 3 times my age. A creditor who offered to settle the family's financial troubles in exchange for a wife he could command." Her voice thinned. "When I refused, they called it defiance. Then impropriety. Then deceit. They dismissed me before I could defend myself." Alexander closed his eyes briefly, as though steadying himself against the cruelty of the revelation. "And you walked here alone?" "I walked until my shoes split," she said. "Until the sky blurred. Until I found myself near your estate, praying only for shelter from the cold, not intervention, not charity. Merely warmth." She swallowed. "But people saw me. People always see what is easiest to condemn." He exhaled slowly, the sound heavy with something fierce and unspoken. "You deserved protection, not exile." "I deserved nothing," she whispered. "I only wanted a chance to exist without being hunted by my reputation." Silence stretched between them, fragile, intimate, charged with unspent emotion. Snow gathered on Charlotte's hair, settling like fine lace, and Alexander reached instinctively to brush it away before stopping himself. The restraint in his hand spoke more eloquently than touch ever could. At last she looked up at him, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "What will become of me when the night ends? Your kindness has bought me hours of safety, nothing more. Tomorrow your guests will speak. London will speak. Every door will close again." "You speak as though fate is unalterable," he said softly. "For women like me," she replied, "it often is." He stepped nearer, close enough that his breath warmed the space between them. "Miss Finch." "Charlotte," If you had but one request, one thing you dared ask of me, what would it be?" She inhaled sharply. The cloak around her seemed suddenly too heavy, too warm, as though it pressed her fears to the surface. Her lips parted, but no sound came. "Speak," he urged gently. "I will not turn you away." Her eyes closed. She had rehearsed 100 prayers in her mind over the past days. Prayers for shelter, for food, for a kind stranger. Yet none of them felt as terrifying or as necessary as the truth pressing now against her heart. When she opened her eyes again, vulnerability glimmered like candlelight fighting wind. "Your Grace," she whispered, voice breaking on the edge of hope and despair, "there is one thing, but it is improper, impossible, and unthinkable." His gaze did not waver. "Let me judge what is impossible." She drew a trembling breath, the snow swirling around her as though urging the words out. Then, barely audible, as though fearing she might shatter by saying it aloud, she spoke the plea that would alter both their lives. "Marry me before Christmas ends." For a long moment after her whispered plea, the world seemed to pause, snow hanging midair, lantern light trembling, even the cold itself holding its breath. Alexander stared at Charlotte as though her words had shifted the very ground beneath them. She stood before him wrapped in his cloak, trembling not from the cold now but from the enormity of what she had dared to ask. Her cheeks were pale, her lashes heavy with frost, yet her gaze held a fragile steadiness that struck him deeper than any accusation ever had. "Marry you," he repeated softly, less in disbelief than in recognition of the desperation woven through the request. He reached out as though to steady her, then drew his hand back, wrestling with propriety and instinct in the same breath. "Miss Finch." "Charlotte, do you understand what such a request would mean?" She swallowed. "I do. That is why I should not have asked. But you pressed me to speak the truth, Your Grace, and I fear this is the only truth I have left. I am without prospects, without protection, and without time. Once Christmas ends, even the parishes close their charity lists. I will be nowhere." Her voice cracked. "I would never bind you by force of sentiment. I only ask because desperation leaves little room for dignity." He flinched at the word, as though someone had struck him. Dignity. The very thing society had stripped from her. The very thing he, with all his power, could restore. Yet marriage was no trivial gesture. A duke marrying a fallen woman would stir more than whispers. It would ignite a scandal capable of rending the social order that governed every alliance, every inheritance, every expectation of his lineage. The dukedom had endured for centuries. Could it survive compassion? Charlotte misread his silence as refusal. Her shoulders sank, and she turned slightly away, pressing trembling fingers to her brow. "Forgive me. I should have endured the cold rather than burden you with such a request." "You are not a burden," he said sharply, stepping closer. "Do not speak of yourself as though you were." She blinked, startled by the intensity in his voice. He took a breath, letting the cold steady him. If a man were to marry during Christmas, he could obtain a special license. But such a license requires explanation to the Archbishop's office. A reason. His eyes searched hers. And society will demand to know why. They will not accept silence. "I know," she whispered. "They will assume the worst." "They always assume the worst," he replied bitterly. "Especially of women." Snow brushed against Charlotte's cheeks, melting into her skin like fleeting tears. She looked so small standing there beneath the weight of expectation and humiliation that Alexander felt something within him shift, something long restrained, long silenced by duty and detachment. She had no dowry, no name that remained unblemished, no powerful relations to defend her. And yet, she had stood before him with the courage to ask for what pride might deny but survival required. He stepped forward until the falling snow blurred the space between them in a gentle veil. "Charlotte, if I were to consider such a union, it would not be out of pity." "I do not ask for pity," she said, her voice trembling yet firm. "Only safety." "You would have safety with me," he replied quietly. "More than safety." Her breath hitched. "But at what cost to you?" "That," he murmured, "is no concern of yours." She shook her head. It is. I cannot allow you to destroy your reputation, your alliances, your future marriage prospects. My future marriage prospects are no concern to me. His tone softened as he saw the surprise flicker across her face. I have long known that many women seek my title, my wealth, my position. They do not see the man. Only the dukedom. You, however, he exhaled, a fog of warmth in the icy air. You sought nothing, not even shelter, until necessity forced you. Tears threatened her eyes, though she blinked them back fiercely. You must understand, he said more quietly, that marriage is not simply an exchange of protection. It binds lives. It alters futures. If I marry you, it will be because I choose it, because I believe it is just. Her lips parted, but no sound emerged. He lifted her chin with the faintest touch, tilting her face toward his. Tell me truly, do you ask this only from fear? Or is there something more? She inhaled shakily. I do not expect affection. Only safety. But I will say this. You are the first person in months who has spoken to me without suspicion or disdain. The first who has looked at me and not seen a ruined thing. Her voice softened, fragile yet honest. And if I must entrust my future to someone, better it be to a man of honor than to the unknown terrors of the road. Honor. The word settled heavily in his chest. He released her chin slowly. If we do this, Charlotte, it must be by my terms. Not desperations. She nodded, though uncertainty clouded her eyes. You will not return to the cold, he continued. You will sleep under this roof tonight, and tomorrow we will travel to London. Quietly, with discretion. Her breath caught. Tomorrow. Yes. The license must be obtained before the season ends. His gaze deepened, a flicker of resolve threading through it. And before society can twist your presence here into something dishonorable. He expected her to nod or thank him. Instead, she pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. The cloak slipped slightly from her shoulder, revealing the delicate raise of her collarbone, a sign of how thin she had grown. He reached to steady the cloak, fingers brushing the wool near her skin. The brief contact sent a shock through them both. Charlotte, he said softly, I am not offering a rescue. I am offering a decision. And what decision is that? She whispered. That you do not face this world alone. Not any more. Her eyes filled, though no tears fell. The stable lantern flickered as a gust of wind swept through the courtyard, scattering snow between them like drifting sparks. In the distance, laughter spilled from the manor, the careless joy of those protected by fortune and name. But here, beneath the quiet cold, a different fate was being shaped, one forged not by obligation, but by a choice neither had expected to make. Charlotte drew a careful breath. Your Grace, if you truly mean this, then I will place my trust in you. His answer was a low murmur, almost swallowed by the snow. Then tomorrow, Miss Finch, we begin rewriting what society has tried to decide for you. And as he opened the door to lead her inside, both unaware of the footsteps echoing just beyond the corridor, a shadowed figure paused to listen, eyes widening, breath catching, before slipping away to spread what they had overheard. Dawn crept over the horizon in a wash of silver and rose, its light turning the snow-covered grounds into a quiet, glistening kingdom. Charlotte stood near the carriage steps, her breath drifting before her like a soft veil. She wore a borrowed cloak and a simple bonnet Mrs. Langford had pressed into her hands that morning, whispering a blessing she dared not voice too loudly. The estate still slept, though faint murmurs stirred from the guest chambers, rumors birthed in the night, whispers waiting for daylight to sharpen them into weapons. Charlotte felt their weight gathering like storm clouds. Alexander approached with a composed stride, gloved hands clasped behind his back. Though his expression appeared calm, a quiet intensity lingered beneath it, as though he were bracing himself for a battle not of swords but of stares and words. He nodded to the coachman before offering Charlotte his hand. She hesitated only a heartbeat before accepting, her palm trembling lightly in his. Inside the carriage, warmth cocooned them from the bitter air. As the vehicle lurched forward, Charlotte pressed a hand to her chest, steadying the thrum that would not quiet. "Your Grace," she murmured, "if we proceed, there will be no undoing what follows." "That is the intention," he replied. She swallowed. "You are certain?" He turned to her, his features softening. "Charlotte, this decision is mine. You have not coerced me. You have not misled me. If anything, you have shown more courage in asking than I have in answering." The countryside drifted past the window, white fields, bare branches, frozen rivers gleaming like glass. The motion soothed and unsettled her all at once. Silence settled in the carriage like a breath held between two heartbeats. Then, as if compelled by some quiet force, Charlotte spoke. "I once imagined my life would follow a path of quiet predictability," she said. "A modest home, a modest marriage, a place among those who believed themselves respectable. But now I am to marry a man whose world does not touch mine." Alexander observed her closely. "Are you afraid?" "Yes," she admitted. "Afraid of failing. Afraid of being unworthy. Afraid of being spoken about in rooms where I am not present to defend myself." He exhaled slowly. "They already speak of me. They always have. Let them add this to their tales. What matters is truth." "And what is that truth?" she whispered. "That I am choosing this marriage, not out of pressure or scandal, but out of conviction." His gaze held hers. "You survived cruelty with dignity. You asked for help without deception. Those qualities are not liabilities. They are rare." Her breath trembled, caught between relief and disbelief. The carriage rolled into London as church bells tolled, scattering flocks of pigeons into the sky. Streets bustled with carriages, vendors calling out warm chestnuts, children dragging tiny sleds through slush that reflected the pale sunlight. But as the carriage neared the Archbishop's offices, Charlotte's hands tightened around the cloak. "What if they refuse us?" she whispered. "They will not," he said. "I have the means and the authority. But authority does not erase scandal." "No," he replied quietly. "But intention does." She drew strength from the firmness in his voice. Together they entered the stone building, its corridors lined with portraits of men who had once granted licenses that altered lives, forged alliances, and kindled or extinguished fortunes. A clerk glanced up as they approached, and his eyes widened when he recognized the Duke. His startled bow nearly toppled the inkstand. "Your Grace." "Miss?" The clerk's gaze flickered to Charlotte's plain gown and reddened with curiosity he struggled to mask. "How may we assist?" Alexander's reply was steady. "A special marriage license." The clerk blanched. "At this time of year? With Christmas so near?" "Precisely why it must be granted promptly." Charlotte felt the man's eyes flicker over her once more, a silent assessment, quick and cutting. She wondered what story he would tell his wife that evening, that a duke had arrived with a woman of uncertain standing, that Christmas had birthed an unexpected union, that propriety had bent beneath the weight of something unfamiliar. But Alexander's presence, his stature, his calm certainty, steadied the room. Papers were produced, signatures applied, witnesses summoned. When the clerk asked if the union was of mutual consent, Alexander's voice resonated with a gravity that silenced even the wind rattling the window panes. "Yes," he said, "and of deliberate choice." Charlotte whispered her own confirmation, her voice trembling but true. By midday, the license was secured. They returned to the estate under a sky clearing into pale azure, snowflakes melting on the carriage windows. Charlotte clasped the parchment in her hands, the tangible proof of a future she still struggled to comprehend. She expected relief to wash over her, but instead felt an ache, the ache of stepping into a world that would judge, question, and test her at every turn. Could she withstand it? Could she honor the trust he had shown? As the carriage approached the manor, Alexander leaned slightly toward her. "When we arrive, there will be eyes. Do not bow your head." "I will try," she whispered. "Do more than try," he said gently. "Stand with me." The estate loomed ahead, elegant and imposing. Guests had gathered near the entrance, their vibrant coats and feathered bonnets forming a vivid sea of color against the snow. The chatter ceased as the carriage rolled to a halt. Whispers rose like a tide. Charlotte felt the scrutiny tighten around her like a cord, but then Alexander stepped out, turned, and extended his hand without hesitation. He helped her down with the quiet reverence of a man assisting not a burden but an equal. Gasps fluttered through the crowd. He did not release her hand. "This is Miss Charlotte Finch," he announced, his voice carrying effortlessly across the courtyard. "And she is soon to be my wife." The statement rippled through the guests. Shock, disbelief, a few murmured protests. A lady clutched her companion's arm. A gentleman sputtered into his cravat. But Alexander did not waver. Nor did he step back, hide her behind him, or offer justification. He simply stood at her side, hand in hers, as though the decision were the most natural thing in the world. Charlotte felt the weight of every gaze, every unspoken accusation. But she also felt the warmth of his hand, steady and sure. And for the first time since her exile, she allowed her shoulders to lift, her chin to rise, her breath to steady. The Duke turned toward her, voice lowered so only she could hear. "Ready." Her answer was soft, but unbroken. "Yes." They walked through the front doors together, crossing a threshold not just of the estate but of fate itself. Somewhere behind them, a servant dropped a tray in shock. Somewhere ahead, candles flickered as though bowing to an unexpected wind. And as those doors closed, sealing them inside a world preparing to witness their vows, a single echoing thought threaded through Charlotte's mind. One part fear, one part hope, and one part dawning belief. There was no turning back now.